Aloha. Welcome, A Como Mai. This is Just Cruisin', the podcast. Welcome to this week's edition. It's being recorded on Thursday morning, November 12th, 2020. I'm your host, Larry Jackson, co-owner of Cruise Holidays of Viera. I'll be your cruise director for this week's edition of our podcast that's all about the world of travel, or the world that's not traveling right now. So I want to warn you, this is going to be a fairly short podcast because most of the world is focused this week on the U.S. elections and the aftermath, and we're not going to comment too much about that. Because things are so out of or unknown at this point, we will give you a few items about speculation of what might happen after this is all resolved, but we're not going to be really focused in. We're going to be talking more about the news of the world of cruising and what happened this week and what we can anticipate coming in the future. So let's start off with where we're at right now. Last Friday, Friday before last, we received the CDC's conditional sailing, I don't know what to call it, outline. That it was a 40-page outline providing the conditions for which we could resume passenger sailings out of ports of call here in the United States. As we covered last week in detail, it's a rather ominous document, which doesn't even have all the details yet, because there are a lot of questions in there in the CDC document that they're supposedly going to be printing technical clarifications on, but we haven't received any of those. So as a result of that, all of our cruise lines in the United States, basically where they had been in a voluntary suspension through the end of November, extended that voluntary suspension through December 31st. So there will be no more cruising in the year 2020. It all ended on basically March 15th and has not resumed there at this point. We are now kind of in a limbo while we assess what the CDC has ordered the cruise lines to do. The number one hurdle that we have to overcome for cruising is going to be the simulated sailings, and these are going to be short sailings that are going to basically have people on board who are not really paying passengers, but I don't know what to call them, guinea pigs, and we will have to demonstrate that we can do certain things safely, whatever safely means these days. I'm not sure what unsafe means, but anyway, we have to demonstrate what the CDC wants us to show them, whether it has any impact on safety or not. It doesn't matter. The CDC has declared that, so once they declare something, it becomes science, regardless of what anybody else says. So we are pretty much in limbo, awaiting the creation and then the accomplishment of these simulated sailings before we can then get a conditional certificate to begin cruising. So my own personal feeling is, for one thing, it takes a 60-day notice after you apply for the. It takes 60 days after you apply for the certificate after you've done the simulated sailings, and I think it takes about 30 days just to apply for the simulated sailings. So you see what we're facing here. So I'm not anticipating that we're going to have any cruise ships available for passengers before the end of February, and that's just my own personal opinion right now. Well, just a reminder that you're on board Just Cruisin', and our podcast is brought to you every week. And you can get it in a variety of places. One of the best places to get it is our website, justcruisinviera.com. And by the way, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, if you subscribe so that you can get the future issues of our podcast when they are available, there is a little bell icon next to the subscribe button. You have to click that, and then it asks you whether you want to receive notifications. I don't know why they made that a two-step process. It seems to me if you subscribe, you're okay with getting notifications that you're going to receive notifications of future podcasts, but that's YouTube's rules. So just be sure and click that bell to receive notifications so that when we do broadcast or put a podcast up on YouTube, you can see it there. And for those of you who are listening to us, you might want to go to our webpage, and you can then view the YouTube version where you can see me at the same time you're listening to me, but that might not interest you. But if it does, it's available to you on YouTube. Well, let's look at some of the additional cancellations and provisions that we've had come this week, some of it in light of the CDC's clarification about resumption of sailing. Yesterday, Wednesday, November 11th, the Carnival Corporation, including Princess Cruise Lines, Holland America, and Carnival itself, announced that this is their press release, they have reviewed the U.S. Centers of Disease CDC framework for conditional sailing and is seeking additional clarification to fully understand the requirements. See, that's one of our problems. We don't even know what we're up against here. While we await further information, we have temporarily stopped selling all cruises 8 days and longer, which call upon a U.S. port and depart January 1st through November 1st, 2021. So probably see the other cruise lines coming on board with that same policy. I don't know how many people are going to follow through. Also, because now we have told you in past weeks that one of the great experiments that has been going on, which to me indicates that we can safely cruise again, has been MSC's 7 and 10-day cruises out of Genoa, Italy. Now, they have been cruising with only European passengers from France, Germany, and Italy. They've had no problems. They're doing tests for COVID before people embark. People are wearing masks. They're social distancing. They're doing all of the things that we're supposed to be doing, and they've had no problem sailing. However, this week, because of the lockdowns that are occurring in Europe, and most notably in France and Germany, because they're rising cases, which, to me further indicates the lockdown doesn't do any good. But, we can't argue with science, even though science is, there's nothing scientific about this. But anyway, because of these lockdowns that are occurring, they're temporarily suspending those cruises that they were working on in Europe out of Italy until 18th of December. So from the 8th of they stopped on the 8th of November through the 18th. They were doing 10-night voyages in the eastern and western Mediterranean, and they were calling in ports in Italy, Greece, and Malta. And they said the major reason was the major source markets for the passengers were German and French passengers, and so they probably won't be able to travel. So that takes care of our little experimentation. Speaking of experimentation, there is a very large cruise line that operates out of the United States that has been cruising along. Now, they had a couple of outbreaks where they had to quarantine some crew members, and they had to put some people ashore in a hospital in Guam. But this is a worldwide cruise operation. It's called the U.S. Navy. Now, I wonder how they're able to operate if, according to the CDC, cruise ships and people on cruise ships are close quarters. I don't think anybody has many closer quarters than the U.S. Navy does in their wardrooms, in their staterooms, and in their bunk rooms. But they're cruising all over the world, and how are they able to do this with this horrible COVID-19 that just infects cruise ships and just knocks out 90% of the passengers and kills all these hundreds of other people? Why has nobody brought this up with the CDC? Why can't we do what the U.S. Navy is doing? Just throw that out as one of my editorials here. Okay, continuing on with bans and restrictions and everybody getting on board the hysteria here. That's why I call it a panic-demic, because that's basically what we're doing. We're just panicking, and Chicken Little was right, and we're running around screaming about that. The Canadian government on October 29th extended the ban on most cruise ships sailing in Canadian waters until February 28th, 2021. Now, why should we care about this? Well, because of our stupid Jones Act and the act about private vessels sailing with passengers, we have to go to Canada before we can go to Alaska. And as many of you know, our Alaska season starts right around the middle of May. And so Canada has now extended the ban, so we can't go there until February 28th. More than likely, they're going to extend that again, because obviously we have this horrendous outbreak of cases, and the world is about to end because of all the cases that are happening here in the United States. So I am now starting to seriously wonder whether we're going to be able to set sail in Alaska in 2021, or at least at the beginning of the season. We may be looking at a June or July restart for Alaska. Again, this is a lot of logistics involved to move ships through the Panama Canal up into the Alaska area, and getting the crews on board and things like that. So if they even lifted the ban on February 28th, I'm not sure we could resume sailing in Alaska by the middle of May. So stay tuned on that. Now we have another insane set of people here in Florida. During the last election, Key West voted to had a ballot measure that restricts the size of vessels and the number of cruisers that are going to be allowed to go ashore or to dock in Key West. They have no desire to keep their economy going down there, so I guess they'll just collect unemployment and welfare from the rest of us in the state of Florida because of this stupid measure. The Election Day ballot called for a vote limiting the number of cruise passengers coming ashore to 1,500 a day. Okay, that's about 1/4 of the passenger capacity on the Oasis of the Seas, and limiting the capacity of ships calling at Key West to no more than 1,300 passengers, which gets you eliminates almost every cruise line in the world other than, let's say, Azamara, Oceana, Silver Sea, Regent Seven Seas, and Crystal. Knocks out all the large ones, such as Royal Caribbean, Carnival, and Norwegian cruise lines. The enlightened citizens of Key West approved this ballot measure by 60% to 40%. And here's some of their do-good liberals down there. We realize that Key West hasn't been offered the opportunity to have any input in how cruise ships come and visit us, and we decided that we needed to take a stand, said Jolly Benson, vice president of the Committee for Safer, Cleaner Ships. They don't want safer, cleaner ships. They don't want any ships. Last year, nearly 1 million people visited Key West on a cruise ship, which is almost half of the tourists that go to Key West, okay? So you want to knock out half of your economy because you want safer, cleaner ships. Those opposing the cruise, the referendum was keenly fought by two distinct cabins. Those opposing cruise ship pollution, totally unproven, and the tourism-related business community keen to preserve jobs. Gee, how stupid is that? Wanting to preserve jobs. Wow, people are nuts. The changes will be added to the city's charter, but they are filing lawsuits. The port operator has already started legal proceedings against the Committee for Safer, Cleaner Ships. So there you have it. I also want to remind you that Just Cruising is brought to you by Cruise Holidays of Viera. As I mentioned in the opening, I'm the co-owner, along with my lovely and gracious wife, Linda Jackson. We are a boutique travel planning store located in Melbourne, Florida, which is right next to the now empty Port Canaveral. And we are available when all of this hysteria ends and this insanity stops to help you in planning your next travel vacation or travel plans, however it may be. I want to remind you, the reason I wear these what are known as aloha shirts, you might call them Hawaiian shirts each week, is because we lived in Hawaii for over 25 years. When we're able, or when, again, all of this ends and we're able to go back to Hawaii, we go there at least once a year and sometimes 2 and 3 times a year. We are Hawaii destination specialists. Hawaii is back open again as long as you test negative for the coronavirus within 72 hours of arriving in Hawaii. But we would be happy to help you plan a Hawaii vacation. And again, we know all of the islands, we know all the hotels, we know all the things there are to do there, and we love Hawaii, and we'd love to show you our islands if you're thinking of going to Hawaii. You can reach us. The best way to contact us is via our webpage, which is just Cruisin' Viera, Viera.com, or just Google Cruise Holidays of Viera. And you can call us at 321-242-1331. We're on a bit of a limited hours right now, but we have a great answering machine, and we'll get right back to you. Why should you want to plan your vacation with us is because we are a boutique. We care about our clients. We give you individual attention, and we make sure that if anything goes wrong, such as a canceled cruise, that we're there to help you either plan another cruise or recoup your investment that you made into your cruise. And that's what we spend our days doing these days. We are helping resolve our clients' discrepancies on the refunds that they received or the future cruise certificates that they have received from the cruise lines. Is very, very time consuming because the cruise lines have cut their staff very dramatically, and we spend a lot of time on hold trying to resolve these issues for our clients. What does that mean to you? That means you have somebody in your court, somebody to go to bat for you if things go wrong, and I can't think of anything going wrong. They could be worse than a suspension of sailing. So Cruise Holidays of Viera, please think about us and consider using us to help plan your next vacation. Okay, we were talking about the test sailings or the simulated sailings that the CDC is requiring us to do. This week, Norwegian Cruise Lines announced that they don't expect to start the test sailings until January. We've heard nothing from the other cruise lines, Royal Caribbean, Norwegian Cruise Lines. They've given us no indication of when they think they can do these simulated sailings, which is not good. I think one of the problems is they're still waiting for the technical recommendations from the CDC or clarifications on those, so they're not quite sure when they can start. Frank Del Rio, who is the head of NCL Holdings, and that's the parent corporation for Norwegian Cruise Lines, Oceanic Cruises, and Regent Seven Seas. He's also one of the brightest people in the cruise industry. He is a brilliant CEO. Anyway, he said, we want to get this 100% right. We're stressing flawless execution. There's still a lot to learn about the nuances of how to execute these orders. That's one of our problems. Trial sailings will be assessed independently by a third-party firm and overseen by CDC inspectors. Can you imagine a bunch of Washington federal inspectors looking at a cruise and determining if it's safe or not? I still don't. I mean, I'm just flabbergasted that the CDC got put in charge, became the czar, became the Nazis of the crew industry. Mr. Del Rio also says, I believe we will be able to have our entire fleet up and running in the latter half of 2021. So that's one of the more realistic assessments that I've seen. And speaking of the simulated sailings, there's been a lot of press that Royal Caribbean is seeking volunteers to take one of these simulated cruises. Let me give you a little background on how that happened. This is a great indication of how fake news works, not only in politics but in all parts of our life. Every week on Wednesday, at noon, Vicki Freed, who is the National Sales Director for Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, has a virtual coffee chat with travel advisors, travel agents all over the world. And 2 weeks ago, she mentioned someone, and when we have these coffee chats, we're allowed to type in questions for Vicki. And the one she did 2 weeks ago, one of the travel agents asked the question, can we volunteer to be on the simulated sailings? And Vicki just not flippantly, but just casually said, oh, sure, just send me an email. We'll take requests for that, and we'll consider it. I mean, there's no guarantee. Well, when you read the CDC dictates of who's going to be on the simulated sailings, there's no way Vicki could just pick out 50 names randomly on an email list and say, okay, you guys are going to go on the sailing. So this whole thing got really blown out of line. She received over 3,000 emails, which is kind of a good thing because that does indicate a lot of people are anxious to get back to cruising, but it's not going to happen on these simulated sailings. And Royal Caribbean came out later on in the week and said, no, we're first going to use employees and family members of employees, and then we'll look at other people or people outside of our corporation as far as using these simulated cruises. using them to take part in these simulated cruises. Now, let's look at what is the simulated cruise going to look like? Well, most people think it's going to be like what we do now. Whenever a new ship is launched, what the cruise lines generally do, and this has happened in the past, probably won't happen in the future, is they'll have a limited number of invited guests aboard, usually the travel writers, travel media, travel advisors who have been participating selling the cruise line's products. I mean, you have to have a certain amount of sales to be invited on these. They're usually a couple of day cruises. They go to nowhere. And it's basically a shakedown cruise to see how the ship is performing. It's a brand new ship. It's a new crew. Everybody's been put together. We most recently did one of these for Celebrity Cruise Lines when they brought out their new ship. And it's really nice, but there are glitches. I'll never forget we did one of these for the Oasis of the Seas when she first came out. We did one of their shakedown cruises, and if you've been on the Oasis of the Seas, you know they have a aqua show in the back of in the aft of the ship. There's an aqua theater with a high diving platform, and they do a whole show with a pool and people doing water aerobics and things like that. Well, we got on the shakedown cruise, and so every evening at about I think it was around 7 or about 8 o'clock, they said, "Okay, everybody go down to the aqua theater. We're going to preview and practice in front of a live audience." Excuse me, our new show in the Aqua Theater. So every night we go down at 8 o'clock. The music would start, the floodlights would come on, the spotlights would come on, everything, and then the intro would come on, and then someone would run out and go, cut, 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 cut. And okay, that's it for tonight. We'll try again tomorrow night. So we all get up, we go trucking off to wherever the other part of the ship. Next night, we'd all go immediately down to the Aqua Theater. And we would take our seats. The music would start. The spotlights would come out. Maybe a diver or two would come out. A couple of performers, and then all of a sudden, someone would run out and go, "Cut, cut, cut, cut." This is not working. Well, so this went on for the whole. I think it was a 4-day cruise. This went on for the full 4-day cruise. We never got to see the show. I also remember the Rising Tide Bar, which is the bar in the atrium area of the Quantum class or the Oasis class ships, and it's the one that goes from deck, I think it's deck 5 or deck. Anyway, it goes up into Central Park. But it had a lot of hydraulic problems, and it kept getting stuck in between cabins or between decks and things like that. So anyway, that's what everybody's thinking these simulated cruises are going to be, these, where everybody goes out, has a good time, tries out all the new features of the ship, and then comes back and tells their clients and their travel writers, write glowing articles about the new ship and what a great thing it's going to be. That's not what's going to happen here. And I have an article from one of our trade magazines called, and the name of the article is "The First Cruise Ships to Sail and Who Will Be Allowed on Them." And they start, these will not be your typical cruises. And then they talk about what we're used to as far as the shakedown cruises. That's non-revenue generating. What the CDC is proposing is, however, very different. These sailings will be designed to test all of the health and safety protocols being put in place, and they will cover every aspect of a more typical sailing. The CDC will be studying, remember this, they're looking over your shoulders, and if they don't approve it, you're not going to sail, you're not going to make money, you're not going to stay in business. Anyway, the CDC will be studying how a ship handles everything from embarkation to disembarkation, meal preparation to shore excursions. Funny, they're not doing all this at all-inclusive resorts. They're not doing it at theme parks. They're not doing it at hotels. Anyway, because the CDC will need to have people on board, cruise lines must apply at least 30 days in advance if they wish to do a simulated sailing. As for guests, this is not to be something open to just anyone. For one thing, passengers will have to have written certification from a doctor indicating that they do not have pre-existing conditions, which would put them in a high-risk category when it comes to potential complications arising from an infection of the Rona. How many doctors are going to be really willing to sign off on a certificate like that? A little bit of liability issues there. Anyway, passengers will also be required to agree in writing that they are voluntarily participating and not as a condition of employment or future compensation. They must also be warned that cruising during the current health crisis is an inherently risky activity, but going to Disney World is not. Finally, they have to agree to submit to a monitored observation period and lab testing before they're allowed to embark. And what's on board? What's going to happen? Well, just like a regular voyage, guests will have to go through the regular check-in and embarkation process, which is probably going to include a COVID-19 test. Once on board, guests will be taking part in the usual onboard activities, including dining and seeing all the shows with all new health protocols in place. If the ship's future voyages include stops at private islands owned by the cruise lines, and it's assumed that that's the first cruises that we'll be doing, they have to include such a stop on these simulated cruises so that the CDC, once again, Big Brother, can access how well. No, it should be saying can assess how well passengers can be protected in that environment. We're in the world of spell check. Anyway, there will be a simulated outbreak on board the cruise. At some point during the sailing, the crew will have to prove that they have the ability to handle the transfer of positive or symptomatic passengers or crew from cabins to isolation rooms. The ship will also at some point have to quarantine all passengers and non-essential crew members. So you'll be locked in your stateroom. They'll bring you your meals. You won't be able to do anything. Doesn't say how long the quarantine has to last. And the last thing any ship will want is to launch a simulated sailing in hope of being certified, and due to a lack of preparation, find out they have failed this test and have to start from scratch. I have a theory about these simulated sailings and about this whole CDC conditional order. It's going to be very expensive. We have to bring crew members in from all over the world to do these, and there's no assurances that you're going to pass the test, that the CDC is going to be happy with what you do. I have the feeling the CDC is not going to be happy with anything we do. I think the CDC is waiting until one of the cruise lines goes bankrupt, and then they'll be happy, and then they'll let us go sailing. However, because possibly there's a vaccine on the horizon, I think maybe the cruise lines will opt, or thinking, maybe they're considering opting, just let's wait and see if we get the vaccine. We can't afford to jump through all these hoops that the CDC is requiring us to jump through, not only for the simulated sailings, but for if we pass the simulated sailings, what we have to do to get passengers on board, the amount of money we have to be willing to spend for things like contracts with hotels to quarantine people, non-commercial transportation to get people home if there's an outbreak on the COVID-19 on the ship. So I don't know. I just suspicion whether the cruise lines are really going to have the ability to spend all of this money the CDC is requiring them to do. And I think that's part of the CDC's background or raison d'etre here as to because they obviously don't want people sailing. Okay with the U.S. Navy doing it, but not okay with you doing it. Okay, there was one little bright note out of when the CDC came out with their conditional sailing order. They said that, remember, for some unknown reason, they delayed all of this coming out by 60 days so they could receive comments from the public as to whether we should start cruising again. All I hear is let's listen to the scientists. Not sure why we needed 60 days to listen to all of the non-scientists in the world, but they'll keep the mantra going, listen to the scientists. But during the 60 days, they received 13,000 comments from non-scientists, and it said that 75% of them expressed support for the industry's return to sailing. Now, that has absolutely no influence on CDC because they're a bunch of bureaucrats who basically have been fighting the Trump administration hand and tooth and about resuming cruising, so that didn't bother them a bit that 75% of 13,000 respondents who took the trouble to write them wanted us to resume cruising. So they put into place things that just really basically prevented us from returning to cruising. Well, a little bit of speculation here about the elections with if Biden is inaugurated as president, and if he is confirmed as president, as opposed to being declared president by the news media, which somehow got put in charge of, we got the CDC in charge of cruises, and now we have the news media in charge of the Electoral College. There's speculation that we could resume sailing to Cuba, and it says, as recently as last week, a top Biden foreign policy advisor. I don't know how you get when you're not even a president, you get a foreign policy advisor. Anyway, Biden told Reuters that Biden would reverse the decisions that are separating families, limitations on family travel and remittance if he won the White House. Now, does that mean they're going to return to the rules about families sending money and visiting Cuba, but not cruising? Don't know. So, again, a lot of speculation here. But let's see, we just to give you a little background on Cuba, we started cruising there again in 2016. By 2018, we had 20 cruise lines carrying 800,000 passengers to Cuba annually. It was very successful. We went twice. We thoroughly enjoyed it. If you want to see what socialism will do to a country, I heartily recommend you go to Cuba and look at some very miserable people. One of the things that they did on our excursions, I'm not really sure why the Cuban government allowed this, was they took us to one of their stores, their ration stores, where they get these ration coupons to buy things like eggs, flour, milk, the basic necessities, and they can only get so many per month. And they took us to the store, and there were maybe 20 items on the shelf. I mean, it was this big, huge, empty place with nothing to buy. So we might be resuming cruising to Cuba. We'll have to stand by and see what happens with the certification of the election before all that happens. Really good news this week, I think, and I hope it's a trend that we're going to be seeing in the industry. Celebrity Cruise Lines is going to be simplifying the pricing of cruises. What they announced this week was a new program called Always Included. Every sailing, the price that you pay when we at Cruise Holidays quote you a price on a cruise, that price is now going to include Wi-Fi, drinks, and gratuities. Okay, so it's really going to simplify things as far as when you're. May make a little bit more difficult when you're comparing cruise lines if all of them don't adopt this. But knowing how the cruise industry works, once one cruise line does something, generally everybody falls in line, and the whole industry does it. So not a lot of originality in the cruise industry. Okay, what's included? Unlimited drinks. Now, what this is their class. They have two packages, two drink packages, two beverage packages for Celebrity. They're including the classic package. The classic is basic cocktails, nothing real fancy as far as the alcohol they put into them. In other words, it's like Bombay Sapphire Gin as opposed to Hendrick's Gin. That's the classic package. Wines by the glass, and generally it was wines up to $12 per glass. Beer, sodas, specialty coffees and teas, juices, and bottled water. Bottled water is very important here. Unlimited Wi-Fi and the daily gratuities. It was $14.50 per person per day. Don't know what it's going to be if and when we resume cruising. Now, that's the included in the Always Included. If you want to upgrade, you can upgrade to two other packages. One is called Elevate, and this is going to allow you to get the premium drink package, and also shore excursions up to $200 per person. Indulge will allow you to get the elevated package. They will give you streaming Wi-Fi, which I don't think you really need unless you're going to watch television while you're on the ship, and up to $400 per person in onboard credits. So that's the way it goes. If you book your cabin in the Retreat, which is the exclusive portion of the ship, they're going to, which has its own restaurant and everything else, the Indulge package will be included in that. So Celebrity Cruise Lines, their new pricing Always Included. And I think it's a great step forward for the cruise industry. It's really going to simplify things when you're talking, and it's going to more towards making things all-inclusive. And I think more of you cruisers have told us, at least you told me, that you'd much rather have all of these things included rather than paying for them separately or being nickeled and dimed while you're on the ship. Okay, before we close, I just wanted, there is someone sailing in the Caribbean. It is one of my favorite cruise lines. It's called Sea Dream Yachts. These are 112 passenger yachts that cruise in the Caribbean. They cruise out of St. Thomas, Barbados in the wintertime, and they did their first cruise last week with 56 passengers on board. They invited one of the travel writers to go on board with them, and he wrote a report about what it's like to go on a cruise and what it might be like to go on a cruise in the future. I'll just read some of his article, and the name of his article is, "I just boarded the first cruise ship to sail in the Caribbean since March. This is what the process was like. The process of getting on board a cruise ship is going to be a little different for a while, but maybe not as different as you might think." Let's see. He said within minutes of arriving at the port of Barbados to board the ship, he was taken there in a COVID-free, I don't know how they did that, transfer. And he found himself in a medical tent face-to-face with two staffers in full contagion gear, masks, goggles, medical gowns, the works. And he had his temperature taken. He underwent a pulse oxidation test. That's the one they put on your finger, which absolutely tells you nothing about anything. But anyway, it was his second COVID, and then he was given a COVID-19 test. The second one he had in 3 days. In order to board the Sea Dream, he had his luggage was sprayed down with sanitizer. Even his hand luggage was sprayed. So he said that the process was not nearly as obtrusive as I had imagined. I was dropped off at the port in a private COVID-safe transfer arranged by the cruise lines. And it took him 48 minutes to get to go through the medical screening, to get his second COVID-19 test, and get on board the ship. Now, once he got on the cruise lines has these new Abbott tests that take 15 minutes per passenger to process, and so they have 3 of them, which means they can do 12 passengers per hour. Now that's going to be a little bit of a tough thing with a larger ship. He was seated in an isolated area while they processed his test, and then once he received a negative one, and he was allowed to board the ship. He walked down to the ship. They sprayed his luggage again and his shoes. He was then got on board. There were no masks required on board, which is a little bit different, and Sea Dream's been taking some heat about this, about not requiring masks while on board. So that was it, and things went well. So he's going to give us reports from the rest of his cruise, and hopefully we'll be able to share those with you. Well, I think that's about going to do it for us this week on Just Cruising. Glad you've been here with us. I wish we had a little bit better news to share with you. As things develop, we'll be keeping an eye on them, and we'll be back again next week to share with you what we find out about when we might be able to resume. So we'll give you some more editorials about our opinion about this whole situation. Hope you've enjoyed our podcast, and you'll come back and join us again. Until we see you again, keep on cruising. 1, 2,